Well, welcome guests. My name is Christian Brock. I'm CEO with Elected Officials Protect America. We're going to give it a few minutes before we actually start the press conference to allow our guests and attendees to come in via Zoom. So just stand by with us for a few seconds. All right, look, we had great attendance. Well, awesome. All right. Well, again, welcome all. My name is Christian Brock. I'm the CEO for Elected Officials to Protect America, and excited to be here with you all today and to be joined by some of our esteemed leaders across California, representing some of the coastal communities in California, as we talk today about the development of offshore wind capability in California and the impact that would have on Californians as a whole, as they transition or the move to transition away from fossil fuel based energy production to renewable energy sources, wind being a plentiful source of renewable energy for the state of California. Again, I'm excited to have with us today our guest speakers, Dr. John Heidi for the Mayor of Morro Bay, Heidi Harmon, former Mayor of San Luis Obispo, Andy Pease, who is a current council member of San Luis Obispo. And then last but not least, Carmen Ramirez, Ventura County Supervisor, all of whom have been leading the fight in California for the environment and renewable energy solutions for quite some time. And again, welcome all. Great to have you here. I'm excited to hear and learn from you all today about the work that you're doing in your respective communities and jurisdictions, and how offshore wind can be part of that as we go forward towards 2035. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. John Heidi, again, Mayor of San Luis Obispo.
Morro Bay.
Excuse me, Morro Bay. Morro
That's
Bay.
okay.
Morro Bay.
That's out of my jurisdiction. I'll leave that to Heidi and to maybe Andy in the future. Christian, great to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today. You know, Morro Bay and the Central Coast have, in my opinion, a historic opportunity ahead to become an energy hub that will help California reach its clean energy and climate goals, and to bolster our economy with the West Coast's first floating offshore wind farms. Once operational, these wind farms, which would be located approximately 20 miles off the shore of Morro Bay, will provide a new renewable energy resource for California and create much needed jobs, attract public and private investments, and bring long-term economic development opportunities to our region. Later this year, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, will award leases through a competitive auction to project developers for site assessment and site characterization activities. The leaseholders will then have the opportunity to submit a construction and operations plan directly to BOEM. If ultimately approved, and there will be 3 projects that will be approved at the site, they will have the opportunity to then undergo an extensive environmental review once their projects have been approved. And also, once constructed, they will provide clean, renewable power for the next 3 decades to the Central Coast. These projects represent the kind of innovative approach we need for a clean energy economy that protects the coasts, fisheries, marine life, tribal and cultural resources that we value so much as Californians. We believe that the Central Coast will be best served by the approach that gives all voices a seat at the table. The city of Morro Bay has entered into a community benefits agreement with one prospective offshore wind developer, Castle Wind, that has also developed a mutual benefits agreement in partnership with the local fishing community industry. We're eager to form more partnerships with other members of the industry and to see this as a model for how offshore wind projects can be developed in a way that maximizes the benefits for affected communities. BOEM recently issued a proposed sale notice for the auction that offers a 2.5% bidding credit to prospective developers that have entered into these community benefit agreements and also fishing industry agreements. The purpose of this credit is to provide an incentive to mitigate potential impacts to the community and stakeholder groups, particularly within our local fishing community. We applaud BOEM's efforts to recognize the importance of including such a bidding credit, but we strongly believe that a 2.5% incentive is not enough. And we believe that BOEM will respond to input that we are giving along with others to increase that bidding credit to the various industrial partners that are out there. The issuance of a proposed sale notice and the momentum behind the process to launch this new renewable industry is a significant step in our efforts to help address the climate crisis and help California reach its goal of achieving 60% production from renewable energy by 2030 and 100% renewable and carbon-free electricity by 2045, while bolstering the local economy and creating new jobs. This endeavor coincides also with other initiatives that we're pursuing in Morro Bay. Last year, an agreement was reached to begin the process of replacing a portion of the shuttered Morro Bay power plant with one of the world's largest battery energy storage facilities. That's in partnership with Vistra Energy. This project itself would provide the resiliency and security improvements that will be needed to stabilize our grid by storing energy while providing clean, emission-free, affordable electricity to our customers and consumers. It's a critical component of the future for our regional power grid and one of the many infrastructure investments that will be needed to allow for a successful offshore wind industry and a thriving clean energy sector on the Central Coast. The city of Morro Bay and San Luis Obispo County have been working tirelessly to pursue the offshore wind project along with other key stakeholders, as mentioned, tribes, the fishing industry, members of our federal delegation, leaders in Sacramento, and key partners throughout the state. The project will be 3 gigawatts of offshore wind that we expect to be installed in the proposed Morro Bay wind energy area that will have the ability to power over 1 million homes with clean, renewable energy and generate over $260 million in new revenue for our communities and bring hundreds of well-paying jobs to the region. A clean energy future is within our grasp, and Morro Bay is poised to be a leader in the collaborative effort to make carbon-free energy a central underpinning of our economy and floating offshore wind a key part of California's clean energy portfolio. We'll continue to advocate for this once-in-a-generation opportunity while working with the state and BOEM in support of this auction that works for the Central Coast. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Heidi. There's great interest there in seeing what you all are doing in Morro Bay. Interesting, we have some questions, but I'll hold to, we kind of get through some of our other panelists or speakers. So up next, Heidi Harmon, again, former mayor of San Luis Obispo, and now currently Senior Public Affairs Director for the Romero Institute on Less Green, California. Heidi, please.
Thank you so much, Mayor Heading. That is so exciting. It used to be, at least in my perspective, that the coolest thing about Morro Bay was the shell shop. And now it's just like the center of the renewable energy universe. And it's super exciting. And even more broadly, SLO County has, I think, Topaz Solar Farm, which I think is or was one of the, if not the biggest solar farm in the world. Please check me on that. I think it's up there. The anaerobic digester, which is or was at least initially the only one of its type in the United States. And the city of SLO, we committed to the most ambitious carbon neutrality goal at that time of any city in the United States. And so there's so much going on here on the Central Coast that we have to be proud of. So it's super exciting, and I'm really excited for Morro Bay in particular, but more broadly, really the Central Coast in general and the state of California, and really puts California back, hopefully, in a leadership position in terms of ambitious, exciting policy around the climate crisis, the defining issue of our time. And as we know, as often happens, as California goes, so goes the rest of the United States, and fingers crossed, the rest of the world. So we definitely punch above our weight here on the Central Coast. So that's super exciting because the Central Coast is ideal for these deep water powerhouses that will advance a clean energy economy that protects the coasts, fisheries, marine life, tribal and cultural resources while combating the climate crisis, because we can no longer have sacrifice zones. So I want to just kind of begin and end by really making sure that we're clear that there is a proposed and likely Chumash Marine Sanctuary on its way that also has a lot of climate benefits amongst many other things. And so this is a yes, and we can protect that likely protected area and develop offshore wind in a way that supports our local fishers and the community here. Offshore wind developments will be the first here in California, will be the first American offshore wind farms with floating turbines. And this cutting edge technology has been providing power for Scotland since 2017. It's always great to see some areas out in front like Scotland, and it's been deployed rapidly around the globe. So offshore wind in California has wide support among labor unions, industry, and environmental groups. And what's cool about these technology-based energies is that they just get better and better and better, cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and less intrusive, and create more and more power. Unlike the very toxic, detrimental forms that we are sort of forced to use now, like toxic methane gas. Those old, antiquated, toxic technologies get worse and worse and worse, more and more expensive, and more detrimental to our environment and our future generations. More wind, more offshore wind means less toxic methane gas. And there is a proposal currently right now in the state of California to add more toxic methane gas plants. We need to say no to that and yes to more offshore wind energy, not only from a climate perspective, but from an environmental justice perspective. All or most of those types of natural gas or methane gas plants are always in low or very low income communities, predominantly populated by people of color. It's time that we take a stand to say no to the direct pollution that kills thousands of people every year just by living close to those plants. This is an environmental justice issue. This is a racial justice issue as well, which is all the more reason to get excited about offshore wind that does not have those impacts. But it's not enough to just say yes to offshore wind. We also need to use this evolving technology and this opportunity to say no more permitting, period. We need to end permits for fossil fuel extraction and yes to permits for renewable energy. So no more fossil fuels. We need to phase out oil drilling and refining, clean out our power sector, so absolutely no new gas plants. We need clean and healthy transportation for all, electrify our buildings, which I think Councilmember Pease will be speaking to some of the work that we've done in SLO around that. And being mindful about technologies like carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. There's a lot of trickiness in all of that. But there's things to be mindful of with offshore wind, but it's all mostly positive and we're super excited about it. So we need the jobs and we need the justice. So we need high labor standards, unionized jobs, and by tapping offshore wind, we will create potentially almost 18,000 good paying jobs by 2045. For those of you that aren't familiar with the unions, they have an apprentice program. That's where they take often younger but new people into the industry and train them up and get them ready for this new renewable energy economy. This is a critical part of our economy. And it also often lifts up folks that wouldn't have these opportunities otherwise. And so we've seen a lot of those stories here in San Luis Obispo of folks that were, for example, formerly incarcerated, really being lifted up into the local economy in a positive way by the apprentice program of our union. So the unions, I think people may not understand, it's not just about jobs. It's so much bigger and deeper than that, the service that they're providing communities. So by meeting our electricity needs through clean, pollution-free offshore wind and energy, California can deliver quality improvements to frontline communities. So again, justice, jobs, and joy. So I want to invite folks because the Air Resources Board in California up in Sacramento on June 23rd rather, will be coming out with their climate change scoping plan that does include asking for or suggesting that we do bring on more toxic fossil fuel extractive technologies. And so the Sierra Club, many environmental justice groups, Let's Green California, and others will be joining together in solidarity on June 23rd at the Air Resources Board to say no to toxic extractive fossil fuels and yes to the renewable energy future that we're talking about here with projects like offshore wind. And so you can reach out to me or the Sierra Club and get lots of details about that particular action. So California's independence from gas for electricity can and will be accelerated with offshore wind power and other renewable energy resources. The Central Coast of California is the spot for it. We're super grateful that we have this beautiful landscape that not only is beautiful to be in, but is a perfect spot to create a regenerative, clean energy that will keep our beautiful landscape beautiful and our next generations healthy for many generations to come. So thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Heidi. Again, you have been a staunch leader in this space and championing the environment and the move towards renewable energy for quite some time, at least for the past 4 years that I've known you and before that. And it's exciting to see the work that has gone on in San Luis Obispo, initially with you at the helm as mayor. And so I'm really excited to have Andy Pease, who is still a council member there, continuing to fight, to kind of update us on what the work you're doing there in San Luis Obispo and how offshore wind, as your neighbor in Morro Bay, is moving forward, how offshore wind will impact the residents of San Luis Obispo. So, Andy.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm thrilled to be a part of this panel. I have so much respect for my colleagues who have been doing this amazing climate leadership and are putting goals into action. As Heidi mentioned, the city of San Luis Obispo elected a council that would, and a mayor that would be supportive of climate action and make it happen in a significant way. So we allocated resources and we established an Office of Sustainability, and we developed a climate action plan. It's ambitious. We set a goal of 2035. We didn't even realize at the time that that goal of carbon neutral by 2035 for our entire community was the most, or one of the most ambitious in the nation, and thankfully has been followed. It's the plan is really centered around reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also a document of optimism. It recognizes that thoughtful climate action can improve community equity and well-being and support a strong local economy. All these things can work together. It is a key of this climate action plan, however, to have renewable energy to electrify everything and then have a clean power grid to support that. And so that is absolutely why wind power is so important to the work we're doing. Here in San Luis Obispo, we recognized early on that we can electrify everything. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it really didn't make sense to have all our buildings be electric because we were still supplying so much of the grid with fossil fuels in order to generate electricity. That is just no longer the case. We have the capability to be able to generate all of our electricity with renewable power in the very near term. So we're doing lots of solar energy, of course, adding the battery storage, and then with the offshore wind, that provides that piece that will unlock our ability to really deliver a clean energy future. Here in San Luis Obispo, we have encouraged and incentivized for all electric construction. And so we have 1,300 homes here in San Luis Obispo coming online that use no gas at all. They're saving millions of dollars by not having to lay the gas infrastructure in the first place. They're using, all these homes are using super energy efficient heat pumps for heating and cooling and hot water, even their dryers. electric dryers, cooking on induction cooktops, very powerful and so much safer, so much healthier than using that gas infrastructure. Of course, everywhere we're seeing electric vehicles. So electrify everything in the next 5 years, absolutely doable. 10 years for sure. But it does depend on having a clean energy grid. We have to have the solar panels, the battery storage, and the offshore wind. The offshore wind will help us to balance the grid because it generates, especially at night in the evenings. So with that, we do call on state leaders and our federal leaders to help us make this happen. At the local level, we have the strategies for carbon neutral, we have the political will, and we need the support. There is no reason to be having new gas extraction permits or any fossil fuels. We need to leave those in the ground. We've got the capability. Let's make it happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Next, I'd like to bring in Carmen Ramirez, supervisors for Ventura County, and someone who's actually been working and fighting for Black and Brown communities, communities of color for quite some time. Carmen, as a supervisor for the county, and you see these things occurring in and around the communities there, the different cities, can you give us a perspective from how, as a county supervisor, offshore wind will impact or support the county's goals?
Well, I'm sure that there are some proposals for our area, though it's possible a little further north, as Heidi and the other speakers mentioned, is where you get more powerful wind. And we definitely need this. Ventura County has been a major historic oil producer. We have a lot of wells here. Some of them are abandoned, some of them are not really properly taken care of. And so that's a big concern of our community. I represent an environmental justice community, Greater Oxnard, and our community for 20 years now has been pushing for cleaner energy, for a reduction in the toxics that are in the air and in the soil and in the water. And so that's why I'm actually here. I think that's why I have a lot of support in my community, because our community fought a liquefied natural gas terminal, which turned out to be a big boondoggle that we defeated because they told us that we needed the natural gas. On the contrary, it's exported, and that is true with oil. I heard this morning on NPR that we are an exporter of oil in our country. So we don't need to. Why are we doing this? This is, just doesn't make sense. I wanted to say that just very briefly, the important thing is the transition to good jobs. And I think this is one of the things that hangs up our community. People do have a few people have very well-paying jobs in the extraction industries, and naturally they don't want to see them go. And I feel for them because of their concern. But here's an opportunity to get in with the future. The horse and buggy industry really fought the internal combustion engine. They really literally were worried about jobs. And here we have the opportunity to get some better jobs that won't hurt people, won't hurt the health of our planet, of our human beings, our children. In our community, we also joined a community choice aggregator along with Los Angeles County, Ventura County, and most of our cities in Ventura County are part of this. And where we invest in clean energy, we will be investing in the wind farm generated energy that is coming. We are, of course, one of those sacrifice zones that Heidi mentioned, and that is just unacceptable. We can't do that anymore. And I do believe that a lot of the change has been coming from our marginalized communities that are saying, we can't tolerate this anymore. We have opportunities for new jobs. I have to say, we are dealing with the pushback from the oil and gas energy, which I think would be very interesting to see how much they've spent during this primary season. I know they had raised $8 million to defeat measures, and they were successful, unfortunately, to defeat measures to protect health and safety in our Ventura County. But $8 million, you can say a lot of baloney and people are nervous. So, but we have to find a way to get over that. And I do think the opportunity is for new jobs, better jobs, and a safety net for the workers who cannot transition. That is all possible. We can do this. We have, I'll just say that our city of Oxnard fought a gas-fired power plant on our beach. We already hosted them for 50 years. And our city, and when I was on Oxnard City Council, along with the leadership of our community, fought it. Now we have a 100 megawatt battery storage facility off the coast, clean, renewable, efficient, which can light up our county for 30 minutes, our entire county of 800,000 plus people. That was just the beginning. Technology has improved, as Heidi mentioned. I'd like to say we have to work quickly. We cannot be taking steps back like has been proposed by the Air Resources Board and new permitting. It's just really, let's not go back. Let's go forward. We have opportunity, and we are at an urgent moment. The International Panel on Climate is telling us, red alert, let's listen before we hit that wall, and we can do it. It's easy to be demoralized, but I think it's very important to have hope in this project. These other projects like it give us hope. And I always like to quote what has been attributed to Nelson Mandela: fighting an entrenched apartheid system for decades, a cruel system which victimized really everybody, white and black alike. And he said, it always looks impossible till it's done. And it was done. And of course, we have work to do, but we can do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. And thank you to all our guest speakers today. For the audience, we'll kind of transition into our Q&A, and I invite you to ask your questions, drop your questions into the Q&A section. To kind of start us off, I'd like to, kind of go to the conversation to the subject of jobs and stakeholders. And I'll tee this up for Dr. Heidi, but open it up for all the panelists to answer or chime in on. With there being very little, like I would say, public knowledge or media coverage of the offshore wind initiatives and how that supports the building of the economy and the availability or the creation of new jobs. You mentioned that you have labor unions that are supportive of this. One, how have you gone about bringing those stakeholders to the table and getting them involved in this project and addressing their concerns? And then two, do you foresee those new jobs going beyond the initial construction? And what jobs that could be beyond the initial construction of offshore wind platforms?
Yeah, thanks, Christian. Great questions. The first is early on, there have been a number of stakeholder groups throughout the county and even statewide that have met as this whole new industry evolved, and the potential for BOEM actually going through the process of entertaining lease auctions has occurred. And so very early on, labor was part of the discussion for a number of different stakeholder groups. Secondarily, there have been at least 2 studies done by Cal Poly to look at potential workforce opportunities that will occur as a result of the development of this new industry. And the third thing, I didn't get into detail about the actual auction process, but it's rather complicated, but I'll try to just dummy it down for myself, that is. And it's this: there's an incentive for developers, and there have been 23 companies vetted that will participate in the auction to bring 3 projects to the Morro Bay Call area, as it's known. There will be a 20% credit offered to any entity or any developer that brings a plan that includes both a very detailed plan for workforce development and how they will partner in making that happen. And then secondarily, also the development of the supply chain that'll be necessary for the build out of these projects. And so as those bids occur, and by the way, the bidding process will occur in probably August or September, those detailed plans will have to be delineated by the developers. And as a result of that, I think we'll begin to see a clearer understanding of more detail about the types of jobs, the longevity of jobs during construction and build out of the actual wind farms themselves, and then the potential for ongoing jobs, mainly around maintenance of these facilities. And the early estimate, and it's very early, is that we're looking at over about 600 jobs being developed during construction. In maintenance, you're probably looking at several hundred jobs during the maintenance period. And the estimate now is somewhere around six figures, low six figures in terms of the average salary. That again will be further defined as I think the bidding process occurs. And the other issue that I'll add that's important to this thing is there is right now presently no deep water port along the Central Coast. We all know that, and that's one of the studies that the state will be doing to look at the feasibility of developing a deep water port to allow for the actual construction and assembly of the infrastructure required for these wind farms. If that occurs, and that occurs in close proximity along the Central Coast, that could add hundreds of jobs to this mix.
Thank you for that. Any others? Other panelists got thoughts on?
Christian, I don't have I think John did a great job of addressing all of that. Again, just want to reiterate the critical nature of unionized jobs in general and how important they are. As I said before, we know people need jobs, they need to take care of their families, but they also need a place to get a foothold in the economy and in their lives. And the apprenticeship program is critical. And that's why things like even, building electrification, like the policy that San Luis Obispo enacted, is critical, again, not just for climate change, but that the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, for example, can count on those buildings being electrified and can start to train the workforce that we're going to need to facilitate this new renewable energy economy. And I'm not seeing this question that I just wanted to speak to real quickly in the questions or the chat, but when I post about offshore wind, the pushback I usually get is about views or about seeing the turbines themselves. And so I just wanted to quickly address that so people are aware that my understanding is that they will essentially not be visible from shore, that there might be a rare exception potentially at the top of Hearst Castle. If you get up really high, obviously you can see out, but it won't impact the sort of, average person living on the Central Coast in terms of their view. And I know that can be a concern for folks, but I don't know if Dr. Heading or somebody else has a different understanding, but I know that comes up for folks. So I wanted to make sure people understood that.
That's a great point, Heidi. What I'll add is that you can go to BOEM.gov, and there are simulations that have been done as to the visual impacts, which are exactly as Heidi has described, minimal to none, at various points along the coast from Big Sur all the way to Los Osos. And so BOEM.gov, and then if you, in their search engine, just type in visual simulation, Morro Bay call area, and you'll be able to see what they've done in terms of modeling.
All right, awesome. We've got a couple of questions here. There's kind of split between the chat and the Q&A. Again, I remind the audience, if you have questions, please drop them into the Q&A. But I'd like to ask this question from Susan in regards to, what's the possible timeline for the Morro Bay offshore wind area? And I'll combine that with another question from Haley. What's the possible timeline for that? And do Dr. John, would you or others foresee offshore wind maybe even eventually replacing or being replacing oil rigs, our offshore oil rigs, or the offshore oil rigs being refurbished if possible to become offshore wind platforms?
So a great question. Thank you, Christian. The timeline, the actual auction itself, most likely August, September of this year. After the auction and lease sites, 3 lease sites will be auctioned off. Once those have been determined, I'll shorten my answer. Estimated time to build out will be totally dependent upon the availability of a deep water port and how close in proximity that is. But the estimation is 6 years to full build out. So it's not going to happen overnight. It could happen more quickly, depending upon the availability and close proximity to this site of a deep water port. And that is being studied by the state at present. In terms of replacement for oil rigs, there's a lot of strategic area along the coast of California. So the Department of Defense has only sanctioned at present, along with BOEM, the North Humboldt County area and the Morro Bay call area at present. However, there's a working group we understand that are looking at potentially other areas, but I don't see the replacement of rigs by floating windmills happening, basically because there's a lot of science, obviously, that goes into the determination of the siting. You've got to have a tremendous amount of wind that blows continuously. We're fortunate in Morro Bay to have, off of our coast, 30 miles out there, 20 miles out there, the kind of wind that blows continuously and is amenable to these kinds of floating platforms.
Thank you. That actually, I think, lends well to the next question posed by Eric, is what then needs to happen in the legislative or regulatory move to allow these type projects and the development of offshore wind to move forward?
Me again? I'll go.
Or just open. Yeah,
or
just
anybody.
open,
I'll open it up. I don't want to dominate it, but from a regulatory environment, BOEM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, is the lead federal agency that determines call areas. In addition to that, the other key player is the Department of Defense, because the coast of California is very strategic. And so they're a filter through which any project, after scientific determination of wind viability is done, the next filter is it strategically possible to build there? It's my understanding that they are looking at potentially future sites, but those have to be married to the availability, again, of deep water ports in close proximity. And in addition to that, connectivity to the grid. So with regard to Morro Bay, not only do we have energy storage that's being built, but also we have grid connectivity at the old Morro Bay power plant, and also Diablo Canyon. When it shuts down, we have grid connectivity there. Right now, 4.5 gigawatts have been approved, but there is a, as you know, what is it? AB 525 mandates 20 gigawatts by, remind me of the year, Heidi, 2045 or 2030, perhaps.
2050 is
2050. Thank you. And so they're definitely going to have to, and I understand that they are looking at potentially other sites based upon those criteria.
Yeah, and important to just remind folks that when there's a huge difference between an offshore wind turbine spill and an offshore oil spill in terms of environmental impacts. I feel like an offshore wind turbine spill might just be one of those Beyonce hair, wind in the hair situations, which I think we can all agree we need more of, as opposed to a completely toxic, detrimental oil spill off our beautiful coasts.
I can relate to that.
Well, you bring up a great point there. In your constituencies, and I know, again, these are coastal cities, and I believe tourism is one of the things that a major attractor or industry for San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay. What are some of the environmental groups' concerns that stated as their concerns around offshore wind? And likewise for even the fishing industry. John, you mentioned that you were able to have been able to get the fishing industry to the table to be engaged in the development of the offshore wind area there for Morro Bay. But for Andy, are you guys seeing similar concerns and expressions of issues from environmental groups?
Well, I think that we as a Central Coast, even though San Luis Obispo proper as a city is inland just a little, I think we recognize our interdependence as a Central Coast community all the way, Monterey and Santa Cruz down to Ventura County through Santa Barbara, all of those areas, we have a lot of shared interests and commitment to the environment. And so I think certainly our industries are very coastal dependent in terms of fisheries, but also a lot of tourism that folks are going to be coming out here and celebrating the natural beauty of our area. So sure, when there's an oil spill, it's very detrimental to all kinds of industries as when we're trying to develop kind of a thriving, sustainable economy. And it's just morally devastating to see the wildlife that is being drowned in the oil. So I think it hits us all around when we're trying to do right by the earth, to have this oil and gas, and then to hear the possibility of increasing wells instead of shutting them down is very discouraging for the energy and the passion that we have. I think throughout California, really, to embrace the natural environment and the possibility of sustainability in a true equitable kind of way as well.
I've talked to several environmental justice groups about this just to make sure that I was on the right track. Often there can be blind spots, and I've heard nothing but good things. Obviously they want everything to be done with thoughtfulness and care, but they see this as a huge mechanism for the elimination of the toxic pollution that they are experiencing in frontline communities. And I do think also that even though, as I said, and as Dr. Heading confirmed, that there will not be visual impacts essentially here on the Central Coast, I nevertheless think that this is still important that predominantly white, predominantly affluent coastal communities are grappling with these issues, which is something that is unusual for communities like ours to be grappling with. As I've said, mostly toxic extractive fossil fuel projects are almost always in communities that are lower income and communities of color, and they bear the disproportionate public health impacts of those. And so again, while we won't be having public health impacts and we won't even be having visual impacts, still I think it's good that our community is having a conversation about the rights and responsibilities and how we're going to sort of get through this moment together. And so I think saying yes to offshore wind is a really important way of being able to, with confidence, say no to those toxic projects that are disproportionately impacting communities of color.
Thank you. I've got a couple other questions that have popped in. I'd like to go to Eric's question first, and this one's about siting. Said, Morro Bay is the current site. Where else, or what other locations could be sites or projects for these projects land along the coast?
So the initial look by BOEM was only 3 sites. The Humboldt site, which has now been obviously sanctioned and will go to bid at the same time as the Morro Bay Call area. The second was the Morro Bay Call area. And the third was a site called the Diablo Canyon site off of Diablo Canyon. That one has been taken off the table because of quote unquote strategic concerns by the Department of Defense. There's some secret stuff that I don't know about, that we don't know about, that occurs along the coast. And that is very strategic at present. So those were the 3 initial sites that, again, BOEM looked at. 2, again, as mentioned, will go to auction. And then they are currently studying above Humboldt to just the north of Humboldt County, the potential for a number of other sites there. In addition to that, they're beginning to look south of Diablo Canyon. But we haven't heard details as to exactly where the potential sites might be. because it requires literally a couple years of study to determine, the wind capacity, the water depth. There's just a whole number of scientific issues that have to be evaluated before you can even consider a call area as being viable.
It's great you mentioned that, and then brought up the concern or the fact that there's a lot of science and study and engineering that goes into this. And then there's a portion that you all as elected officials have ownership of or responsibility for, and that's the policy. So one of the questions that popped in too is for local elected officials, what are some of the policy gaps that you see at the local level that you're addressing? And then even at the state level that we'd be calling upon the governor and the state legislature to fill. As you mentioned, John, and I'm a little long here, as you mentioned that AB 525 has already requires 3 gigawatts of commitment offshore wind by 2030, excuse me, with up to 20 gigawatts by 2050. What are some of the policy gaps that you see that, hey, we need to enact sooner that would accelerate that to meet the need and growing demand of energy consumption in California? If any, for response, and it's open to any of you to respond. I know I said a lot, but
I'll jump in with a start. I mean, first, I would like to thank Mayor Heading and the Morro Bay City Council for the rigor of their research and analysis and meetings to make sure, is this right for the Central Coast? And because it's not a slam dunk. So we, in that process of review, I think they've made a clear direction about ways that this can serve the community and in a bigger way. So I appreciate that engagement, and I think that at the local level, really knowing what's right for our communities overall, and having the state and federal agencies listen and partner with the local community, I think has been so successful. And I think that the climate action overall has been really important at the state level in terms of fuel efficiency and electrification of vehicles, in terms of the building code and electrification in those regards. So continuing to have the demand move up. I think our goals are not ambitious enough, and I think we need more teeth in making them happen. So I think it's been kind of easy for us to slip and, miss that goal, miss that milestone. And so I think that we need more teeth, more funding in order to really get these electrification, both on the demand side, but also on the generation side, to get that clean renewable energy and the storage that we need to make it happen.
All right, we got time for one last question, and it kind of goes along with your comments here. As part of that acceleration, and a question from Eric is, what do you see the state regulators' role in this, and what would you like to see them do a little more, maybe a little more ambitiously towards the action at the regulatory level? And it's open to all.
Yeah, go ahead, John, if you have.
No, I just, I think, one of the big issues was getting AB 525, enacted, and that was huge. But it's interesting to have a mandate without a way forward, and so there's a tremendous amount of work that has to be done in a short period of time. Unfortunately, nothing in government moves very rapidly, as we all probably know. However, from an administrative standpoint, with the current administration in place, the development of wind energy has moved at lightning speed comparatively to the prior administration. And I don't want to make this a political issue, but it is. And secondarily, I think that I don't want to minimize this hurdle with the Department of Defense off the coast of California. Having been involved in vetting Diablo Canyon and the Morro Bay Call area, and having interacted in a number of meetings with DOD, I can tell you right now that the Department of Defense would rather not see any more windmills built or wind farms built along the coast of California, no matter how far out they are. And I don't say that without having a fair amount of knowledge over a large number of meetings based upon concerns as much as they could articulate them with regard to their strategic initiatives. And I understand that and I get that, although they can't go into detail as to what those are. I think for me in the future, the further development of any more wind areas in California will be predicated on overcoming the hurdle of the Department of Defense's concerns. I'll just label them as concerns strategically over what they consider to be a potential proliferation of these sites. Remember, the Morro Bay Call area is about 370 square miles, and that's 3 different sites, lease sites of about 100 plus windmills that will produce 3 gigawatts of energy. If you're going to get a gigawatt and a half from up north, that's 4.5 to get to 20. That's a huge leap. And so from a policy standpoint, we've got to work, and we've been working with Congressman Carbajal and our federal leaders to try to assist us with getting over the hurdle of that block that we've seen with DOD. I think BOEM is certainly now wants to move as quickly as possible. These leases are not inexpensive. To just get a lease site is about $1 billion just to win a bid to have the opportunity to build one of these sites. And so I do believe we've gotten over the BOEM hurdle and them moving quickly, but now it's DOD in my experience to come that we need to get through.
Well, and hopefully the DOD recognizes, and I'm pretty sure they've made many statements to this effect, that the climate crisis is the biggest national security threat that we face internally and externally. And so hopefully they can use that lens when they're making these, what must, are tough decisions at this point in terms of placement of offshore wind turbines.
And that's a great point, Heidi. We've actually been focusing on energy security or energy independence as a national security issue for quite some time now in the Department of Defense, which, as you point out, many people publicly don't know that the Department of Defense has been studying climate crisis as a national security issue for years. And they do list it as one of the top threats to national security. So with that in mind, I want to just, again, thank our speakers today, our panel group, for your comments and education on the work of offshore wind development here in California. For our panel, for our audience, for those of you who question we didn't get to, please feel free to reach out to our comms director, Ramona Duhu at ramona@protectingamerica.net. I'd like to close with just a note that elected officials to Protect America here in California has been leading the call for Governor Newsom to transition California away from fossil fuel production and to develop offshore wind. And currently we have over 430 elected officials that have signed on to a letter asking or urging the governor to take more aggressive action towards transition to California away from fossil fuels. And currently on a separate initiative, we have about 40, almost 50, over 50 elected officials that have indicated their support for continued development of offshore wind in California. And we'll be happy to share those lists and with our media contacts and participants listening in. But again, I want to thank our speakers today and our guests for participating. As we continue this conversation going forward, please visit us at protectingamerica.net to learn more. So thank you all.